This was the scene in the north of England town of Bradford recently, when police had to step in to separate right-wing and left-wing demonstrators. These groups are at the opposite extremes of British politics, so it's hardly surprising they disagreed. But the cause of this particular disagreement is one of the most divisive and important issues Britons have faced in many years. Should they or should they not withdraw from the European Economic Community? Britain was taken into the common market 2 years ago. But that was a decision of the former Conservative government, not of the British people, which was far from unanimous in its support. On June the 5th, the Labour government is holding a national referendum to determine whether Britons really do want to stay in or get out. Helping them make up their minds are action groups both for and against.
Decide which way to vote the referendum.
The issue has split Britain down the middle. Those voting to stay in claim they've got the backing of the most influential leaders of industry, commerce and politics, including, of course, Prime Minister Harold Wilson. And if the opinion polls are right, they've got the majority of the public behind them as well. Such claims are dismissed by the anti-marketeers as mere propaganda. The cabinet, they say, is equally divided, and most Labour members, both in Parliament and throughout the country, are on their side. One prominent anti-marketeer, Industry Minister Tony Benn, has also claimed public opinion's been unfairly influenced by the media, especially the BBC.
Oh, well, then they can give you stuff as well. Yeah. Right, yeah, I do. Not today, because we're getting them
A meeting like this shows just how the market issue has cut across normal party lines. It's a meeting of pro-marketeers, and the speakers include prominent members of all three major parties. Jeremy Thorpe, leader of the Liberals,
Mr. Jenkins,
Roy Jenkins, Home Secretary in the current Labour government, and Conservative Shadow Minister William Whitelaw.
Nonetheless,
those who think we should return to the isolation of 35 years ago. But their ideas make as little sense as pulling the bedclothes over your head on a winter Monday morning and hoping that time will stop and you won't have to get up and go to work.
Within the Conservative Party, the campaign to stay inside the market has naturally centred around one man, former Premier Edward Heath, the man who took Britain into Europe 2 years ago. Although Heath is no longer the Conservatives' leader, he's still one of the party's major figures, well known as a dedicated European.
If Britain were to leave Europe now, if Britain were to break the Treaty of Accession, which I signed as Prime Minister in 1972, with the full authority of Parliament, then the shock waves across Europe, and indeed across the Atlantic, could be powerful in their effect, and their consequences dangerous for the whole stability of the Western world. A Europe without Britain, like a Britain without Europe, would be both weaker and less prosperous. The work of a whole generation would all be put at risk. The effect of 2 world wars this century was to shift power out of Europe, westwards to America, and eastwards to the Soviet Union. But the world is too important a place to be left just to the Americans and to the Russians. I want to see power and influence return to Europe and return to Britain as part of that Europe.
Whatever the political implications involved, Britain is, first and foremost, a trading nation, and most arguments about the market centre around the effects of membership on Britain's trading performance. The facts and figures are there, But the overall picture is so complicated that both sides can use the same statistics to argue a different point. In 1970, for example, 3 years before Britain joined, there was a small profit on trade with the other 8 countries which now make up the market. 2 years later, that profit turned into a loss, and after 1 year in the market, that loss more than doubled to well over £1,000 million sterling. Last year, it doubled again. The government points out that Britain's trade deficit is not restricted to Europe. Anti-marketeers agree, but say that deficits with the rest of the world can be largely accounted for by special factors, such as the steep rise in the price of oil and many other basic commodities. Take those away, and the trading loss with Europe stands out as even more remarkable. Pro-marketeers claim the real reasons are nothing to do with membership. Manufactured goods, for example, used to show a profit for Britain. But domestic production can't meet demand, so imports have soared. By far the biggest item on Britain's European shopping list is food, which accounts for more than half the total trade losses with the common market countries. Last year, Britain spent nearly £1,500 million on food imports from the EEC. Imports from the rest of the world, especially the Commonwealth countries, have been reduced in consequence. European grain imports have gone a long way towards replacing traditional supplies from North America. Britain's overall trade performance is one of the major factors in the economic crisis the country is now undergoing. The London Stock Exchange sees an almost daily worsening of Britain's financial strength. Foreign confidence in Britain has slumped badly, and the pound is now worth nearly 25% less than 3 years ago. In British industry, the picture has rarely looked gloomier. The vitally important car manufacturing sector has been plagued by relatively low efficiency and by strikes and stoppages which have further reduced productivity. This was the scene during a recent layoff at Ford's. At the same time, another American car giant in Britain, Chrysler, was facing serious cash flow problems and a major strike. Problems at the country's biggest car makers, British Leyland, have been so large that a government takeover has been necessary. These economic woes have so far had only a limited impact on the majority of British wage earners. Prices have risen sharply, the overall rate of inflation is now over 21%, but the shops are still full of goods and customers. One reason is that for many sections of the workforce, wages have been rising far higher than prices. Miners, electricians and engineers have all received settlements of 30% or more. Teachers recently got 27%, and the railwaymen are now asking for at least 30%. In the opinion of many experts, and they include British Chancellor Denis Healey, Britain is simply living beyond its means, and the day of reckoning is due.
Like a little umbrella, you don't have to have...
Anti-marketeers agree that the situation's bad, but they don't accept that staying in Europe will do anything to put Britain on a sounder footing. One of their foremost spokesmen is Peter Shaw, Minister for Trade in the present Labour government.
The prosperity and progress that had marked the common market in the 1960s has now come to an end. Throughout the mainland countries of the EEC, unemployment is high. Germany well over 1 million, France approaching that number, and correspondingly high percentages in the other countries of the EEC. Investment is falling, and economic growth has virtually ceased. Indeed, now what recent events have demonstrated is that the common market, far from being an area of economic and political strength, is one of great vulnerability and weakness. It's an area crucially short of all kinds of raw materials and is totally dependent upon the supply of imported oil. And in the new era of raw material shortage and oil scarcity, purchasing power has shifted dramatically from Western Europe, and indeed from other advanced countries, to those other continents and areas where raw material supplies are abundant. Other areas of great natural strength, inevitably, in the new economic circumstances of the late 70s, are the two great continents of North America and Australasia, who are so abundantly endowed with all the resources that a modern economy requires. And surely it should not have escaped the attention of our people that in most of these areas where the future is now so much brighter than it is in the EEC, Britain has natural advantages and contacts, links in trade, investment, people and language, which are far stronger than those of any other European country.
To the average Briton, the price of food in the shops has always been a major market issue. When Britain first joined, even ardent supporters admitted grocery bills would rise, and they were right. After a year's membership, food prices had soared by an unprecedented 20%. For many Britons, it was hard to swallow then, and even harder now when inflation's taking a further bite. It's a point that's been quickly seized by anti-marketeers who claim Britain could buy food cheaper outside, especially from the Commonwealth, if it weren't bound by common market rules. On the other hand, pro-Europeans argue food prices would have risen anyway, because cheap food was rapidly disappearing from world markets. In addition, they claim, continued membership will give Britain greater security for future supplies. Whatever the arguments on the consumer side, the majority of British farmers will probably vote to stay in.
70, 80, 70, 80, 90, 80, 90, 80, 90, 90 pound, 90 pound. 10.
Though farmers haven't yet won the greater prosperity they expected from membership, it's generally been world market pressures that have been to blame. And while massive rises in production costs may have shaken the faith of some pro-market farmers, most still hope ultimately to achieve price levels similar to those elsewhere in the common market. Certainly they prefer the security of membership within the community to the prospect of competing from outside. Britain as part of a Europe united under a single elected assembly is the dream of the community's supporters. But it's seen as a nightmare by those Britons dedicated to getting out. They're either suspicious of the European Parliament at Strasbourg or hostile, claiming that Britain, as one of the most democratically run nations in the world, should never surrender its sovereignty to outsiders. The European Parliament consists of members from each of the partners in the community. They have the right to discuss and return for further consideration any proposals put before them. But if they levy taxes or change laws here, all member countries must comply. Anti-marketeers say the system is dangerous in that it relieves Britons of their right to govern themselves through their own constitutionally elected representatives, their MPs. The opponents of the EEC claim it's not so much in Strasbourg that the trouble lies, but in Brussels, at the impressive headquarters of the community. The Berlaymont building houses an army of bureaucrats. civil servants and committee men dotting the I's and crossing the T's on some 3,000 regulations a year, all becoming law in the member countries. This is also where the so-called faceless men of Europe sit. They're the 13 common market commissioners with whom the effective power is vested. They must swear an oath to put EEC allegiance before the interests of their own countries. And as Europe's big lawmakers, they're the heart of the system which British anti-marketeers can't accept. Arguers for membership say it would guarantee Britain a voice at Brussels. William Whitelaw.
And so, far from being a fear, the issue of sovereignty is one of the most powerful arguments in favour of our remaining in the community. Whether we like it or not, whether those who fear our participation in Europe like it or not, the community will go on. Decisions are going to be taken in that community that will affect our lives and our future, whether we are there or whether we are not. The community as a whole can exercise considerable sovereignty because as a united community they are responsible for 1/3 of the world's trade and form a bigger group of nations than any other bloc in the free world. So if we wish to be able to continue to influence events and provide that leadership in international affairs, which is one of the great traditions of our country, then it is vital for us to have a forum in which to help to exercise the collective sovereignty of Europe. And that can only happen if we remain in the community.
One country which has already been through the painful business of a referendum on common market membership is Norway. At the time Britain joined, the Norwegian government went to the country, recommending that they should join too. But the voters decided against it by a 6% majority. That small margin reflected how bitterly divided people were on the question. In fact, it was quite an emotional issue at the time, with families heatedly arguing the pros and cons amongst themselves. The result of Norway's referendum was a defeat for the establishment. For everyone who was thought to be important in public life and parliament had been in favour of joining the community. Politically, the vote came as a bombshell, blasting the small Liberal Party out of the arena for good and whittling away a quarter of the support for the Labour Party. Linked with the upset in politics came an upsurge in nationalism. Norwegians decided they were strong enough to go it alone and went about proving it. Free of the EEC's benefits, but its problems as well, Norway hasn't looked back, producing profitable ships, iron, paper, aluminium and cement. As world demand increased last year for her raw materials and commodities, Norwegian exports went up by 30%. The country sold £74 million worth of electricity to neighbouring Sweden, and to add to their riches, they also have North Sea oil. With all this wealth shared between just 4 million people, it's small wonder the Norwegians are currently 5th in the International Prosperity League, though the cost of living's high. Butter is 60% more than in a British supermarket. Milk's only 7% more, but meat's twice the price a Britain pays. Though if prices are high in Norway, so are wages. The average industrial wage last year was almost £68 a week, compared with £44 in Britain. How much of the country's prosperity is due to staying out of the common market is a matter for debate. British pro-marketeers say that in or out of Europe, Norway would have prospered. But the antis claim it's because Norway retained its independence and negotiated a free trade agreement with the EEC. How easy would it be for Britain to do the same? We asked the Common Market Commissioner for Regional Policy, George Thompson.
Well, the other members of the community, I think what you can say with certainty, despite the very bad climate there would be, would want to discover what the best long-term economic relationship with Britain. They sell a lot of things to Britain, and they'd want to make sensible arrangements. I think there are two things, however, that one would need to remember in this. One is that whereas we now sell, we Britain sell, I think it's 35% of our exports to the rest of the community, they sell only 8% of their exports to us. So the sort of bargaining advantage is very much on their side. The second thing is that I think it's a complete piece of self-deception to believe that we would easily get the kind of free trade arrangements that were given by the community to Norway and Sweden and Austria. These were given partly because Britain was, along with Denmark and Ireland, was going into the community, and there was a very happy mood, a very different mood from the one that would exist if we were pulling out. But apart from that, Britain is a country of nearly 60 million people, a major industrial competitor of a number of members of the community, quite different in position from Norway and Sweden. And therefore the rest of the community, which would only give us in these circumstances what was in their interests, wouldn't be ready to make with us the same kind of generous arrangements that they'd make with Norway and Sweden. Of course, they'd be ready to make new arrangements with us, but they would be much tougher arrangements and much more to our disadvantage than those that the other EFTA countries got.
Anti-marketeer Peter Shaw doesn't agree. But in the light of Britain's current economic crisis, does he think the country's strong enough to go it alone?
I certainly am not advocating that we go it alone. If that's what people understand by withdrawing from the European community, then of course they're very wrong. But in all the important external policy matters, for example, monetary cooperation, trade cooperation, energy cooperation, we're not going it alone. We are already members of large and important worldwide organizations, of the kind that I mentioned before. We're members of the IMF, which is very important from the point of view of currency support. We're members of GATT, which is very important from the point of view of trade regulation. And we're members of the International Energy Authority, which is helping the world to deal with the problem of oil supplies. So I'm not saying for one moment that I'm in favor of going it alone. What I am saying is that the purposes and the interests of the United Kingdom and its people can be better served by not having an over-close relationship with a particular group of countries in Western Europe.
So you don't see the logic?
It's true that many of those leading the fight to get Britain out of Europe are, like Peter Shaw, internationally minded men who don't want Britain to retreat into narrow isolationism. For them, withdrawal from Europe does not mean withdrawal from the world. The problem is, will the international community see it the same way? Or will withdrawal create the lasting impression that Britons are at heart flag-waving chauvinists, still clinging to a dangerous illusion of independence that simply does not exist in the harsh realities of the 1970s? When Britons vote on June the 5th, they'll be settling once and for all a debate that's raged for 30 years. They'll also be deciding, for good or ill, their own view of their place in the world.
Yeah.